Hello everyone, today I want to talk about brewing combo decks in Canadian Highlander. Brewing combo decks in Canadian Highlander is a unique challenge because it's a 100 card singleton format, which means that the variance is a lot higher and you don't get redundant copies of combo pieces. And in addition, because of the point system, there are a lot of tools that would normally be used to either build the combos themselves or to find combos such as tutors that are pointed, which means you don't have access to as many pieces of redundancy as you would like. Um, and I think that combo decks are kind of hard to approach for people who haven't built combo before, because it's a very scary proposition of overcoming the hurdles sort of inherent in the format. Like many of my other theory videos, this video is going to be pretty long, so there will be chapters in the progress bar down below, and I will be linking a bunch of resources in the video description. So without further ado, let's get into the video. So the first thing is go over our agenda. First, we're going to talk about why would you want to play combo in Canadian Highlander. Then we're going to talk about how to categorize combo. And I've sort of introduced two scales, which is the card types that you end up using and the speed of the combo, which is maybe a little different than how you would normally see combo categorized. Then I want to talk about the nuts and bolts of combos, some basic properties of combos that you need to know, both playing against combo and also for building decks. These are things like how many combo pieces do you need, how much of a deck building footprint does it use, how many zones are you using, that sort of thing. Then I'm going to talk about some deck building heuristics and go over some math in terms of how many copies of each combo piece do you need to find pieces and what tutors should you run. There will be some math. Don't worry if you're not a big math person. I'll be explaining everything, and there will be some tools that you can use that don't require you to know any math. They just require you to put in numbers, and it gives you an answer. Then I want to talk about some combo considerations. A lot of combos are flexible. They're not restricted to a single way of playing them, and you should know what factors about your combo affect its speed, its resilience, and what vulnerabilities it has. And this can give you more information on where to put your combo or how to build around your combo. Then I want to touch briefly on how to put your combo into a shell. This is a really complicated topic that could probably be a video unto itself, so it's going to be pretty brief. But, do you put your combo in an all-in shell? Do you hybridize it with another combo? Do you put it in a mid-range shell or a control shell? That sort of thing. And then I'm going to go over some case studies, just so that you can get an idea of how to evaluate current combo decks that have already seen play in Canadian Highlander. Okay, so why would you play combo in Canadian Highlander? The first reason is that combo gives you a way to go way over the top of fair decks. Most decks, most mid-range and aggro decks are designed to play to the board. There's sort of this song and dance of I play creatures to attack, you play creatures to block, or I use removal to get rid of your blockers or your attackers, that sort of thing. And damage is done over the course of a lot of turns. Combo lets you just completely ignore that and go way over the top, whether that's either immediately winning the game without even interacting with the combat step, or putting in a giant creature like with Reanimator that is just so much stronger than everything else that you basically invalidate what your opponent does. Going over the top is one of the reasons to play combo, and it's a really good way to fight some of these fair decks because you're not playing the same game as them. Another reason to play combo is that it's a way to close the game quickly. You present very minimal opportunity for interaction. When you're playing a fair deck, an aggro or mid-range deck, you have to deploy pieces over time, and it takes time for them to do their thing, to eventually kill your opponent. This gives your opponent a lot of opportunities to find interaction in order to stave off your attack. When you're playing a combo deck, you can sometimes just deploy all your pieces all at once, which means that your opponent has very little time to actually come up with an answer for what you're doing, and it just makes it easy to close games out of nowhere. Also, if you're playing a control deck and you include a combo, this is a way to lock up the game, to use the fact that you've locked up the game to then close the game out, as opposed to giving your opponent a chance to recover. And then finally, the last reason to play combo, it's not so much a competitive reason, but it is a personality reason, which is that playing combo can be kind of fun. It's sort of a puzzle trying to figure out how to play a combo deck in a high variance format like Canadian Highlander, and being able to overcome the odds of the format and be able to put together a combo can be pretty satisfying and rewarding. So now that we've covered why you would want to play combo, let's talk about some classifications. I've split this into two different axes, the card types and interactivity axis, and then sort of the goldfish speed axis. So for card types and interactivity, there are three categories in my opinion. There are the spell-based combo decks. This includes things like Storm with Tendrils of Agony, Thassa's Oracle, or Flash. And you might say, well, wait, Thassa's Oracle is a creature. Why is it not in the creature-based deck? It's because you don't need your Thassa's Oracle to stay on the board to win the game. Usually when you play Thassa's Oracle, you're going to exile your entire deck. You don't care whether Thassa's Oracle survives. So really, the only zone or card type that is able to be interacted with is an instant. You're only using the stack. Same with Flash. Even though Flash technically puts in a Protean Hulk that dies, that then goes and gets a bunch of creatures that stick around, that pile is so protected that realistically the only way to interact with it is on the stack or by attacking the graveyard in some way. After spell-based, there are non-creature permanent-based combo decks. These include things like Underworld Breach, Time Vault, and Paradox Engine decks. These decks require you to have something stick on the board, but they're not creatures. Time Vault is obviously an artifact, Underworld Breach is an enchantment, Paradox Engine is itself an artifact and usually works with a bunch of other artifacts. And this means that they're a little more vulnerable than the spell-based combo decks because there is removal for these permanent types that exist in the format. But the reason why we split non-creature permanent-based versus creature-based combo decks, so creature-based combo decks include things like Seeker Walk for Spellseeker, Hermit Druid, Reanimator requires your creature to stick on board, is that Canadian Highlander is a format that doesn't have sideboards, so people don't often play cards that only hit non-creature spells, non-creature permanents. They usually play things that hit non-creature permanents in addition to other things, and almost every deck packs creature removal. So creature-based combo decks are a little bit easier to interact with because the format is designed around interacting with creatures. It is not necessarily designed around interacting with non-creatures. So that's sort of like the differences between these three different types of combo decks. Is the ones that are mostly interacted with on the stack, the ones that can be interacted with on the board but aren't creatures, so their interaction is a little narrower or rarer, and then creature-based combo decks, which are not necessarily slow because things like Reanimator is really fast, but they are dealt with answers that are common in more decks. Another way you can look at combo decks is what their preferred goldfish speed is. If they're trying to do the thing, accomplish their combo in turns 1 to 4, they're a fast combo deck. 4 is kind of the upper limit of a fast goldfish speed for a combo deck. Most aggro decks in the format are killing you by turn 4.55, and so if you're not winning before then, you're not generally outspeeding aggro decks. So that's sort of the fast combo decks. Then there's sort of the medium speed combo decks that are turns 5 or 6. These would be so fast combo decks would be things like Flash, Breach Storm, that sort of thing. Even a lot of builds of Reanimator, like the fast builds of Reanimator, even though it takes them a few turns to win with their combo, they are looking to reanimate something by turns 1 to 4. Medium speed combo decks include things like Reanimator Control, Time Vault, Paradox Engine. These are decks that are not necessarily looking to get the things out turn 1 to 4, but they are still trying to win pretty quickly. And then slow combo decks are the decks that want to win turns 7+. These are things that are going to be like Scapeshift, or sometimes you'll see things like Slushy, which is Breach in a Control Shell, Spellseeker. Spellseeker can win earlier, but oftentimes might take till turn 6, 7. A slow combo deck, it's not that they are rare, it's just that Canadian Highlander is a pretty fast format, so if your combo isn't expected to be executed until turn 7+, your deck is definitely pretty slow. So those are the broad combo classifications. Let's talk about some nuts and bolts. So the first thing to think about are what are the number of pieces that you need to find to execute your combo. So combos that have fewer pieces mean that if you have fewer pieces in your combo, it means that there are fewer moving parts, which means that it's generally easier to find it because there's less tutors that you need to use, and it's easier to cast or execute because you don't need to assemble multiple cards in hand. A deck like Seeker Walk, which takes advantage of Spell Seeker, Ephemerate, Time Walk, Neoform, Timeless Witness, the only card you actually need to cast is Spell Seeker. So it's a one-card combo. It takes only one piece. Yes, you need all these other pieces in your deck somewhere or in your hand, but Spellseeker itself is a one-card combo. Something like Thoracle Consult is a two-card combo. You need to cast Thassa's Oracle, then you need to cast Demonic Consultation. Same with Time Vault and Key, and Scapeshift is a one-card combo because it goes and finds Valakut and a bunch of other lands. The next thing to think about is your deck footprint, which is this sort of the slots that you need for the combo. And this is a minimum amount of slots that you need for the combo, not including redundant pieces. So, for example, in the Spellseeker combo, in the Seeker Walk combo, you need Spellseeker, Time Walk, Ephemerate, Neoform, and Timeless Witness. This is kind of like the minimum that you need in order to make Spellseeker a one-card combo, which means it's 5 slots. Even though it's a one-card combo, it's 5 slots. Thassa's Oracle Demonic Consultation is a 2-card combo, but you also only need 2 slots in the deck. Same with Voltaic Key Time Vault. And Scapeshift, it's a little bit hard to exactly pinpoint because you do need a bunch of mountains for Valakut, but technically you need two cards, Valakut and Scapeshift, or Field of the Dead and Scapeshift, whatever. Decks with a higher deck footprint leave less room for tutors, interaction, and generic pieces that you need to make a deck function. So if your combo is really compact, but has like 12 pieces in the combo, that's kind of bad. It's actually pretty hard to make that combo work because you risk drawing pieces that you need to be in your deck somewhere. This is especially prevalent in something like Flash Hulk, where the Flash Hulk deck really doesn't want to draw any of its pieces that aren't Flash and Hulk. The next thing to think about are what are the resources that you need to execute your combo. So combos that have really high resource requirements are difficult to execute quickly, which affects the speed of your deck. We were talking about whether it's a fast deck, a slow deck, or a medium speed deck. If you need a lot of mana, then it's generally hard to execute your combo quickly. And if your mana costs are color intensive, it can make accelerating into the combo a lot more difficult. So the Spellseeker combo requires, I think it is 3 blue-blue-white, because you need to cast Spellseeker, get Ephemerate, cast Time Walk, so that's 3 blue-blue-white. That's a 6 mana combo, and it's pretty color intensive, so it's not something that you can generally execute very quickly. To get to 6 mana that quickly, especially with that many color requirements, usually requires you to have a lot of mana dorks, and it requires you to let the game go a little bit longer. You're not generally winning with a Seeker Walk combo on like turn 4, you're probably winning on like turn 6. Thassa's Oracle Demonic Consultation is a pretty low mana cost requirement. It's blue-blue-black, but the colors are very intense. You can't really accelerate it. You can't use things like Dark Ritual, Ancient Tomb, that sort of thing, because the color costs are really strict. Something like Time Vault and Voltaic Key is the opposite of that, really. It's extremely low mana requirement. It's 4 mana total, and it's all colorless. So you can be powering this out with Ancient Tomb, even Mishra's Workshop, City of Traders, Dark Ritual, whatever, Mana Vault. It's very easy to power up the Time Vault combo in comparison to something like Thassa's Oracle Demonic Consultation. And then finally, we have to think about things that are not just what mana you use, but also what do you need to have in play. So Scapeshift, for example, is a pretty low mana requirement. It's only 2 green-green, but the Scapeshift combo doesn't do anything until you have 7 lands in play. So the actual resources you need are 2 green-green plus 7 lands in play. And that's a much harder requirement to get by quickly, which usually means that a Scapeshift deck, a Scapeshift combo is put into like a control shell because it's trying to go slower. It's a much slower combo because you need the time to get your land drops. Other nuts and bolts are what points does your deck use? If your combo uses a lot of points, because the combo itself is a lot of points, it restricts your access to tutors to go find either go find the combo or to fast mana to power out your combo faster. So Spellseeker Time Walk is a 9-point combo, Spellseeker's 2, Time Walk is 7. Thassa's Oracle is a 7-point combo, and you can even think of it as an 8-point combo because it's often paired with Tainted Pact. Time Vault's a 7-point combo. And this means that these 3 decks really don't get a lot of wiggle room to use the busted Tutors or the busted mana acceleration. Scapeshift, on the other hand, is a 0-point combo. Scapeshift's not points, Valakut's not points. That means you can use things like Demonic Tutor, Vampiric Tutor, what have you. You probably don't benefit from mana acceleration because it doesn't benefit your land count, doesn't change your land count. But you get to have a lot of the better tutors and a lot more access to Scapeshift than some of these other combos might have. Then you want to talk about card types, and obviously I talked about card types for classifying things, but the importance of card types is that some card types have more tutors for them. So, for example, there are a lot more creature and artifact tutors than there are enchantment tutors, or even like land tutors. There are some tutors that get any type of land, but there are a lot more that get any type of creature. And if you have card types that overlap, like if you're trying to find an A plus B and your card types of your combo overlap, it's a lot easier to find them because your same tutor can find either part of your combo. So, for example, in Spellseeker, it's a 1-card combo, so you're just looking for creature tutors, and there are plenty of those. Thassa's Oracle and Demonic Consultation, well, you're looking for a creature tutor and an instant tutor, and those don't generally overlap. Pretty much the only ones that overlap there are the generic black tutors, and most of those generic black tutors are points, and because Thassa's Oracle is so many points, you don't usually get them. You don't really get access to them. Something like Time Vault and Voltaic Key, Time Vault is 7 points, but there are a lot of artifact tutors, Fabricate, Word for Invention, Transmute Artifact, that sort of thing. Even stuff like Urza Saga can go and get Voltaic Key. And there's a lot of overlap. It's really easy to find artifacts, and a lot of the artifact tutors find both pieces of the combo. In Scapeshift, there's a lot of things that find sorceries, for example. Some card types are also easier to interact with than others. So, again, talking about earlier, if you're using Spellseeker, it dies to, Lava Dart. It dies to Shock. It dies to whatever. It's very easy to interact with the Spellseeker combo. It's pretty hard to interact with the Thassa's Oracle combo because it's basically using an ETB trigger and an instant. It's a little bit harder to work. It's a little bit easier to interact with Time Vault than it is with Thassa's Oracle because it's an artifact. It has to sit on the field. And for Scapeshift, technically there's land destruction with stuff like Wasteland or Strip Mine that slow it down, but when you actually cast Scapeshift, the only thing that you're interacting with is a sorcery, so that's a little bit harder to fight against. And then finally, the things you want to consider are the zones that you are using in your combo. So the more zones that you have to use, the more opportunities there are for interaction. Something like the Spellseeker combo, it uses the stack. Almost every combo uses the stack in some way, so that's a gimme. But it uses the battlefield. You have to have Spellseeker on the battlefield. It uses the exile zone. So if you've got things where you can't cast things from exile, which are not very common in this format, stuff like Dryneth Magistrate, that's a problem. It uses the graveyard because you have to Neoform into a Timeless Witness to pick up your Ephemerate. So there's a lot of axes on which Spellseeker can be interacted with. Something like Thassa's Oracle, on the other hand, basically just uses the stack. That's it. Time Vault, it uses the zone. It uses the battlefield because you have to have Time Vault stick on the battlefield. Scapeshift, it kind of uses the battlefield because if somebody strip mines your land in response to your Scapeshift, that's a problem. But on the other hand, once you've resolved Scapeshift, the damage is done. So those are sort of basic things that you should keep in mind when you're thinking about a combo and wanting to implement a combo in a Canadian Highlander deck. You should be thinking about what are the resources that I need, what are the card types that I'm using, what points do I have access to, how many zones am I interacting with, how many cards is the combo itself, and how much of a deck building cost is it to put this combo into a deck. Now, let's get into some deck building heuristics. So the first thing I want to talk about is how many copies of a card do you need to have in your deck in order to find that card. And when I'm talking about copies of a card, I mean the card itself. I mean cards that perform the exact same role as it. So for example, in a Time Vault shell, you would have Voltaic Key and Manifold Key are essentially the same because they're interchangeable in terms of comboing the Time Vault. And I mean tutors which find that card. So If you're in Time Vault again, we've got Voltaic Key, Manifold Key, but Fabricate is also a copy of Voltaic Key or Manifold Key. The amount of copies you need to find one card is actually a lot more than you might think. So if you start with only 12 cards seen, which is turn 5 on the draw, or turn 6 on the play, with no extra draws. So already we're kind of like past the fast combo threshold, we're sort of at the medium speed combo. If you have 6 copies of a relevant effect in your deck, you only have a 54.5% and only a 54.5% chance of seeing at least one copy of that card. If you go up to 12 copies of that card in your deck, you get an 80.4% chance. If you go up to 17 cards, you get a 90% chance, and if you go up to 21, you get a 95.1% chance. And your threshold for how often you need to be able to combo, need to find a card, is based off of how fast you want the deck to be. If you want the deck to be faster, you need to have a much higher chance of seeing it earlier on. All right, trying that again without the sirens in the background. The interesting thing is that the amount of cards you see greatly influences the amount of copies you need in a deck in order to still find at least one copy of that effect. So if you've seen 19 cards in a game, which is turn 4 or 5, with plus 8 cards seen, which is the equivalent of about 2.5 good cantrips. And the good cantrips are things that see at least 3 cards. So they're things like Brainstorm, Ponder, Preordain, even Serum Visions. You know, some people might say, oh, Serum Visions is bad, but it does see you 3 cards. If you've got 3 copies in your deck, and you've seen 19 cards, you have a 47% chance of seeing one copy of your effect. If you have 7 copies in your deck, you've got a 78.3% chance of seeing it. If you've got 10 copies, an 89.1% chance. 13 copies, 94.7% chance. But you can kind of see, even just based off of these curves, that if you took 6 copies and saw 7 extra cards, it's all the way up here. And if you went all the way across, that would be like 10-ish copies of the deck. So really, the best way to make sure that you find the effects that you're looking for is to see more cards, because there's this very severe diminishing returns on adding more copies of an effect to your deck. This is also partially why a lot of decks go so well in control shells, because a control shell naturally looks to elongate the game and cast a lot of different card selection spells, which means they see so much more of their deck, so they need to include many fewer copies of the cards that they're looking for. Moving on to how many copies you need to have to start in your hand. So one way of looking at it is, I want to find a copy of a card in my deck by seeing so many cards. But another way to look at it is, I don't want to keep a hand that doesn't have at least one copy of an effect I'm looking for. This is because a lot of times in combo decks, you really want to make sure you start with at least one combo piece so that you don't have to spend all your time looking for it and maybe never hit it. And you also don't really want to mulligan into oblivion just to find your combo pieces. So if you're on your first hand and you have 3 copies in your deck, 3 copies of an effect in your deck, you have a 19.7% chance of seeing it on your first hand. You have a 35.6% chance of seeing it on your second hand, by your second hand, and you have a 48.3% chance of seeing it by your third hand, which is not very high. But if you go up to 7 copies, you've got a 40.8% chance of seeing it in your first hand, a 65% chance of seeing it in your first 2 hands, or a 79.3% chance of seeing it in your first 3 hands. Usually mulling past 5 is sort of a death sentence for combo decks, so I think that these are reasonable benchmarks. 10 copies in your deck gets you a 53.3% chance on your first hand, a 78.2% chance of seeing it by your second hand, and an 89.8% chance of seeing it by your third hand. So as you can see, 10 copies is sort of the sweet spot for finding something by 3 mulligans, or by 2 mulligans rather. Your first hand, your first mulligan, and your second mulligan. And then finally, 13 copies gives you 63.5% chance, 86.7% chance, and 95.1% chance of seeing a copy in your starting hand, a copy of an effect in your starting hand. So it's a lot of math, but basically you need to decide what's your threshold for failure. If you say, I want to make sure that I have a copy in my hand 90% of the time, well, then you should be looking at something like 10 copies in your deck so that you can see it in your first 3 hands 90% of the time. If you say, well, I only need it to show up, 1/3 of the time, or not 1/3, like 2/3 of the time, maybe having only 7 copies is okay, because by your second hand, you'll have a 65% chance of seeing at least 1 copy. Yeah. There's no right or wrong of finding out what the exact number of copies are, because you can always skew towards more copies and then sort of back off. And the thing to understand about this whole idea of finding a copy in your hand, either over time or in your starting hand, is that this does not mean you have the combo piece in hand. It means you have something that finds the combo piece in hand, or is the combo piece. So in the Time Vault example, it might be a Voltaic key, it might be a Manifold key, it might be a Fabricate. And if you have a Fabricate in your starting hand, that's fine. But if you get a Fabricate by your 4th or 5th draw step, that's kind of slow, just as an example. Another way to look at it is that a lot of combos are A plus Bs. So you need one of A and one of B put together. And that means you want to find at least one copy of A and one copy of B. So you're not looking at just one type of card, you're looking at multiple types of cards. And I don't have a nice visualization for this because the formula for figuring this out is a 3 or 4 dimensional graph, which is not something that is very easy to show, especially not 4-dimensional. It's this big long formula up here. If you're interested in the math, it basically is saying what are your odds of getting at least one copy of A or B, or no copies of A or B, and then subtracting it from 1 to find your odds of getting at least one of A and at least one of B. So when you've got some copies of in your deck, you might have cards that count as copies of A and copies of B, but you might also have cards that count as copies of both. So if you're, again, I'm going to use Time Vault as an example. If you're in Time Vault, you've got something like Fabricate. Fabricate counts as both your Voltaic key and Manifold key, but it also counts as a copy of Time Vault because it can find either of them. So if you plug in some values, so here's just some base thresholds, where you have 5 copies of A and 5 copies of B, and no overlapping copies, no tutors, nothing. Then at 12 cards seen, you have a 22% chance of getting 1 copy of A and 1 copy of B. At 19 cards seen, you have a 42.8% chance. And at 25 copies, or at 25 cards seen, you have a 58.9% chance, which is not very high. And 25 cards seen is quite deep into your deck. That's 1/4 of the way into your deck. If we add 6 more copies, 3 to A and 3 to B, then our numbers jump up. At 12, we have a 41.7% chance. At 19, we have a 67.9% chance. And at 25, we have an 82.5% chance. And you can see this is a very huge jump by adding 6 extra copies into our deck, and we're not even counting as them overlapping. So adding more copies obviously makes it easier to find both A and B together. But let's look at what if instead of adding 3 and 3 to 3 copies of A and 3 copies of B, what if we add all 6 additional copies to A? Well, it's not actually as good as evenly adding more copies of both parts of your combo. So at t equals 12 with 11 and 5, you get 36.1%. T equals 19, you get 59.9%. And t equals 25, you get 74.3%. And this is much lower across the board than evenly adding copies of A and evenly adding copies of B. So if you want to increase the consistency of your A plus B combo deck, don't just add more redundant copies of one part of your combo, add redundant copies of both parts of your combo. Finally, what if instead of adding copies that are only copies of A and cards that are only copies of B, we add cards that are copies of both that are overlap? So, in like a Time Vault example, instead of adding just untappers, what if we added more artifact tutors? If you take A equals 5, B equals 5, and the overlap is 6, take our 6 copies and make them all overlap, then we get a huge jump. At 12 cards seen, you have a 55% chance. At 19 cards seen, you have an 81.1% chance. And at 25 cards seen, you have a 92.1% chance, which is a huge upgrade over this 58.9% chance. Basically, what this means is that, in general, overlapping copies of cards, so tutors that can overlap and get both parts of a combo, are very, very good at helping you obtain consistency in getting your A plus B, and probably should be prioritized over copies that affect only just one of your 2 categories. So I have made a Desmos graph to help you visualize this and that you can use for your own calculations. And I just want to quickly go over how to use this. If you're not that interested in it, there's going to be chapters below. You can skip this part. So these 2 curves are the curves that I showed you for your probability of drawing at least 1 copy of a card from 12 or 19 draws. But what if you want to know a copy of a card given however many draws you want and however many copies you want. Then you're going to want to turn on this third graph part. And you can sort of ignore this formula. You're going to get your probability down here, and you can look at the graph. C is going to be the amount of copies you have in your deck. So if I have 7 copies in my deck, C is going to be 7. And then K is going to be how many draws or how many cards you've seen. So if you say I want to see 15 cards, you're going to get this curve. But you can move this K, say I want to look at, okay, let's go to 12 cards, because that's what this original line was, but I want to check different values on that line. Well, now I can just say K equals 12, and I can move my copies, the amount of copies I have, so I can see what are my odds of drawing at least one copy of the card from this many draws. Let's say I have 12 copies in my deck, and I want to know how many cards I need to see in order to find one copy with a 90% probability. Well, I can keep C at 12, and I can move K until I hit 90%, and that's at K equals 17. So this is just a way to visualize it and to sort of play around with it and give you a way to calculate these things without having to go find an external website and plug in a bunch of things. This is just a visual way of looking at it. Another thing that I've done is that if we're looking at the mulligans, which is what I talked about earlier, then this first graph is going to show you those 3 that I showed before, which is at your first hand, your second hand, and your third hand, and with some predetermined points. If you want to know across however many mulligans you want and how many copies you have, you can turn on the second graph, the second line plot, and you can say M is the amount of mulligans I'm taking. So at 0 mulligans, it's going to match that first line. At 1 mulligan, it's going to match that second line. At 2 mulligans, it's going to match that third line. And then if you wanted to say, well, I'm willing to multi 4, you can look at your third mulligan, your fourth mulligan, your fifth mulligan. And technically, you can look at your sixth mulligan, although if you've mulled 6 times, you get 0 cards, so that's probably not very useful. And once again, you can say, well, I have Z copies. I'm okay with mulling twice. Let me just check how many copies I need to get, 90%, which is, 10 copies or 11 copies. This is just another visualization tool that you can use. And then finally, for calculating the A plus B probabilities, again, there's no graph here, but you're going to get your answer out here. You'll put in your copies of A for here, your copies of B here, and your overlapping copies, and then how many cards you want to have seen in order to get your probability. So, for example, I've taken a Time Vault deck by Joking, and I've tagged it a little bit so that I can show you an example. So something like Time Vault, there's only 1 copy of Time Vault. There's no redundant copies of Time Vault, and there are no tutors that specifically only get Time Vault in this deck. So that means that my A copy is going to be 1. I'm going to only have 1 Time Vault. I've got 6 copies that are definitely for untappers. So these are things like Manifold Key, Voltaic Servant, Teferi who slows the sunset. These things directly untap Time Vault. And Trinket Mage can go and get Manifold Key or Voltaic Key, so I've counted it as an untapper. And same with Urza Saga. Urza Saga can also go and get Manifold Key or Voltaic Key. So that will make B equal to 6. Then we've got cards that can get both. So Inventor's Fair can get any artifact, so technically it gets both halves of the combo. Same with Enlightened Tutor, same with Oswald, same with Reshape, Tainted Pact, Transmute. Tribute Mage gets Time Vault or it gets Voltaic Servant, so it gets both parts. Wargate, War of Invention. Tezzeret is an untapper himself and finds Time Vault, so he counts for both. So that means that for sure, I've got an overlap of 10. And you'll notice that even though these overlap, I'm not counting it as part of A, I'm not counting it as part of B, I'm counting it only as part of the overlap. Then there are 4 that are maybes. And this is based on how tolerant you are of tutor chains being worthwhile for your calculations. So, for example, Crop Rotation goes and gets Urza Saga, which gets Manifold Key. Expedition goes and gets Urza Saga, gets Manifold Key. But they also, Crop Rotation and Expedition map also go get Inventor's Fair, which can go and get either part of the combo. Same with Sylvan's Grind. Search for Glory can go and get Inventor's Fair because it's a legendary land. It can go and get Oswald, it can go and get Tezzeret, and these all get both parts of the combo. But it does not itself directly get either part of the combo. So whether you count these is sort of to your own discretion. So if we look at the odds without these being included, so 1 copy of Time Vault, 6 copies of Untappers, and 10 overlap, then we can look at, say, 7 cards. In our first 7 cards, we only have a 31% chance of getting both of them. We go all the way up to 12 cards seen, we have a 60% chance of getting both of them. We go up to 19 cards seen, all the way up to an 85% chance of seeing 1 copy of A, 1 copy of B. And then, you can say, well, maybe I want to include these 4. Let's try them out. So if I add 4 to the both, then I jump up to 93.6%, or, at 12 copies at 74.6%. This is just a tool for you to use to calculate your own stuff, because these sort of calculators are not necessarily out there online, and they, may or may not be as intuitive. So I just sort of wanted to show this as something that you can use that I will share with you guys. Okay. Going back to the presentation. Apologies, I need some tea. So we talked about sort of the density of effects, of copies of effects that you want in your deck, but how does this inform your decision of which kinds of tutors you should run and how many you should include? The answer of how many you should include is how many do you want to have to hit those thresholds that you're looking for in terms of the math, and which tutors you include is really, the simple and dumb answer is you should run all the good tutors, and in reality, you should run the tutors that match the speed of what you're looking for. If you're trying to win by turn 4, you should probably not be running 5 mana tutors, just as an example. If you're trying to go faster, the faster you're trying to go, the better bad quote-unquote tutors are. So things like Muddle the Mixture, which is a 3 mana tutor and it's really restrictive, might be good if you're going really fast and you just need a 2-drop. But the general rules of thumb you should think about are cheaper tutors are better than expensive tutors. And tutors that go to the zone that you need them in are better than tutors that go to hand, which are better than top of the deck tutors. So to zone are things like Entomb or Greenstone Zenith. Those cards, or Court of Calling even, those tutors immediately put the card that you're looking for into the zone that it needs to be in for your combo, which makes it better than having to put it into your hand. And this only applies to some combos. Some combos, you need all your cards in your hand, so this is not relevant. Tutors that go to hand are not card disadvantage. You still get your draw step. You still get to draw new cards, which means that they're not reducing the number of cards that you see. So tutors that go to hand are generally better than tutors that go to the top of the deck. But you might prefer a tutor that goes to the top of the deck if it's cheaper than one that goes to hand. So, for example, Demonic Tutor is really good because it's both cheap and it goes to hand. Vampiric Tutor is cheap and goes to the top of the deck, and that might not be very good, but at the same time, a Vampiric Tutor that goes to the top of the deck might be better than a Grim Tutor that goes to hand. Instant Speed Tutors tend to be better than Sorcery Speed Tutors. This just gives you more flexibility, you don't have to telegraph as much, so things like Mystical Tutor, Vampiric Tutor, that sort of Eladamri's Call, those tutors are better than Personal Tutor, Sylvan Tutor, that sort of thing. You generally want to have the opportunity to act at instant speed rather than at sorcery speed. And another thing that instant speed helps, especially with top deck tutors, is that you can tutor for something in your upkeep and draw it for turn. Whereas if it's a sorcery speed top deck tutor, you have to cast it, goes on top, and then you either have to cast something else to draw into your card or wait a whole nother turn cycle. Flexible tutors are better than restrictive tutors. This should be pretty obvious. Demonic Tutor is really strong because it can get anything that you need, even if it's not a combo piece. Restrictive tutors are less good. Entomb is extremely strong for Reanimator, but if you've already got a creature in the bin, then Entomb doesn't do anything, anything useful. You need something else to go find a reanimation target. It's not 100% true, but just as an example. And this can change. So, like in a Thassa's Oracle deck, for example, Muddle the Mixture gets both of your pieces. It gets Thassa's Oracle and it gets Tainted Pact because it transmutes for 2. But in a Flash deck, for example, Muddle the Mixture is not as good because Muddle the Mixture transmutes for 2, which gets Flash, but then if you want to go and get Protean Hulk, you need to Muddle the Mixture for Eladamri's Call for Protean Hulk. It requires you to tutor chain, which is not very good. Generally speaking, you want your tutor CMC to be less than or equal to the CMC of the card you're looking for. So if you're looking for a 2-mana card, you don't usually want 3-mana tutors. This is sort of a loose part, and this is why this general rules of thumb is in order. Really, these first 3 are the most important, maybe these first 4, and these last 2 are sort of less important. But generally speaking, you don't want to be spending more mana to tutor for something than what you're using to cast it. And this is why you don't usually see things like Diabolic Tutor or even Dark Petition anymore, because they just cost way too much, and they're not getting things that cost that much. And generally speaking, you want your tutor CMC to be less than or equal to 3. There's some exceptions. You can see things like Bring to Light in certain decks, or Behold the Beyond in a Storm deck, which is like a super tutor. But generally speaking, the format's really fast. You don't want to be spending 4+ mana to go and get an effect that you're looking for. Okay, so now that we've talked about a little bit about tutors and deck building heuristics, let's just talk a little bit about some considerations that you should think about when you're building your combo deck. You should look at what factors influence speed. So the factors that influence the speed of a deck are overlapping tutors, because as we showed, if you have tutors that overlap and find both of your combo pieces, that's really strong. The amount of cards that you actually need to find. If you need to find only 1 card, that's way easier to find than finding 2 cards, which is way easier to find than finding 3 cards. How many resources you need. If you're Time Vault and you need 2 generic plus 1 for your key for vault, 1 for your key, and 1 to activate, that's way easier to get than Seeker Walk, which needs 3 blue, blue, white, or whatever, or Scapeshift, which needs 7 lands in play. So the easier your resources are, the lower the resource cost, the faster you can go generally. What are the density of good tutors you get to run? This is a factor not only of points, but also which card types. Some card types just have access to better tutors than others. It's really easy to find creatures, for example, or artifacts. It's really easy to find artifacts, really. Artifacts and sorceries and that sort of thing. It's a lot harder to find things like enchantments. There are a lot of good creature tutors, but some of them are kind of restrictive, so they may or may not be good. And then also sort of the redundant effects. If you're in Time Vault, you have a lot of different copies that are redundant for untapping Time Vault. If you're a Reanimator, you have a lot of different monsters that are additional copies to Reanimator targets. You have a lot of different versions of Reanimate. If you're running something like Thassa's Oracle Demonic Consultation, there are not a lot of redundant effects, so it's a lot harder to go faster because you just don't have the density. Then you want to look at factors of resilience. And there's one of the things that's useful for improving the resilience of your combo deck is if your pieces of your combo are useful outside of the combo. So if we look at something like Seeker Walk, Spellseeker is a combo piece, but at the same time, Spellseeker can go and get Swords to Plowshares, Fourth Airlingus. It can get a lot of different things that are useful. The keys in Time Vault are good for untapping Time Vault, but they're also good for untapping Mana Vaults, or the One Ring, or Shorikai. There's a lot of different uses for those combo pieces outside of the combo. And that increases the resiliency because you get use out of your combo pieces before you have to fire your combo, or instead of firing your combo. Again, redundancy of parts is a factor of resilience. If you play a deck where you only have 1 copy of your A, 1 copy of your B, and you lose access to your 1 copy of your B, you're out of luck. You don't have any chance to refire. If you've got if you've got a lot of different copies, you can sort of interchange them and keep firing over and over, even if you get countered on the first go-around. Another factor of resilience, which is similar to redundancy, is your ability to rebuy your combo. So if you have a lot of redundant parts, you can obviously rebuy your combo just by finding another part of your A plus B, another copy of your A plus B. But for example, something like Breach Storm, there's really only 1 copy of Underworld Breach. But if you have things like, I think it's Argivian Find, or Savine's Reclamation, you can rebuy your Breach if it gets countered. This makes it so that you can refire your combo over and over. Or you might see things like in Flash Hulk, you'll see Noxious Revival, which is your ability to rebuy combo pieces. that makes you more resilient because even if your first attempt gets stopped, you can attempt again. Another factor of resilience is the ability to dodge hate. So things like Thassa's Oracle are pretty resilient because there's not really much that interacts with them. Or things like Reanimator, even though Reanimator is weak to graveyard effects and creature removal, you can play counter spells to help dodge other things. You can play things like Show and Tell or Sneak Attack or Oath of Druids. These are different ways of getting the creatures into play. And so you have ways of dodging hate that is directed specifically at your deck. And then sort of the last thing is like deck footprint. If your deck footprint is really small, then you're unlikely to draw cards that you need to keep in the deck, and you're able to include a lot more things like more hand attack, more cantrips, whatever. You're able to have things that are better than just basically dead slots that need to be in your deck to have your deck function. Some factors of vulnerability are things like what zones are you using? If you're using just the stack, that's a lot better than having to use the stack and the graveyard and exile or whatever. More opportunities for interaction is bad in terms of making your combo more vulnerable. Then you want to look at things like card types that are used. Again, this is basically more opportunities for your opponent to interact with you. If your card types that you're using are very easy to interact with, like they're all creatures and die to lightning bolt or thrust to plowshares, that's a lot more vulnerable than a deck that is using enchantments or artifacts that only die to things like Canker Bloom or March of Otherworldly Light, which are still weak compared to things that don't even use permanents at all. Things that are only affected by counterspells. Another thing that you have to think about is your visibility of tutors. Most of the black tutors, for example, are not visible. When you cast a black tutor like a demonic tutor or a vampire tutor, you don't have to show your opponent what you're getting. When you cast things like a mystical tutor, or you cast an Alagamri's Call or transmute a Muddle the Mixture, you are telegraphing exactly what you're getting. This not only kind of gives away the surprise in game one, but it also alerts your opponent that you're building up to the point where you're ready to fire off your combo. Combos work best when your opponent doesn't expect them and doesn't know when they're going to go off, and are worse when your opponent knows how much time they have before they're about to die. Another thing is sort of the stability of resources. So, for example, like a natural order is a combo, but natural order requires you to have green creatures. And a lot of times to facilitate natural order, you'll play small green creatures like mana dorks. These are a lot less stable than something like Time Vault, etc. It goes back to kind of card types used again, but it's sort of like how easy are your combo pieces able to be taken out by things that are already regularly played. And then another factor of vulnerability is the number of pieces. When you have a lot of moving pieces for your combo, it's easy to take out one of them and have the whole machine fall apart. And if you only have to use one or two pieces, that generally makes the combo less vulnerable to interaction, less vulnerable to disruption. All right, let's briefly talk about putting your combo into a deck and picking the appropriate shell. So there's sort of 4-ish categories that I am going to cover. There's playing all-in combo, which is about going fast and staying linear, staying true to your combo. There's putting your combo into a mid-range shell, which is designed to stretch your opponent's answers thin. Putting your combo into a control shell, which is meant to buy time and accumulate resources. And then there's layering or hybridizing your combo in order to dodge hate or exploit overlap. So when you play an all-in combo deck that's dedicated to just the single combo, the benefit is that you get a lot more resources dedicated towards finding your specific combo, which tends to increase both the speed and the consistency of the deck. When everything is focused on getting your combo executed, you don't have extraneous parts. You're not going to draw things that aren't useful to you. And this is best for combos that don't have very high resource requirements, because it means that you can dedicate as much as you need to finding the combo as opposed to developing the resources for the combo. So, if you're looking at something like Seeker Walk, for example, you need a lot of resources for the Seeker Walk combo, which makes it really hard to stay all in on that combo because you'll probably die before you get the resources that you need. Putting your combo into a mid-range shell is all about stretching your opponent's answer set. When you play mid-range good stuff, your mid-range good stuff has the capability of winning the game on its own. And that means that your opponent needs to be able to answer your mid-range good stuff. So you'll see this in decks like Time Vault or, again, Seeker Walk, where if you have a fair game plan, your opponent needs answers for your fair game plan, which means you get to pivot into your combo at any time. Alternatively, if you're going for your combo and your opponent has a lot of hate for your combo, you can just win with your fair mid-range stuff. If your opponent keeps all counter spells and they don't have any removal for your creatures, they're probably going to lose. And this is best for combos that have very high synergy or high resource costs. So high synergy are things like Time Vault, or to some level stuff like Paradox Academy, because you have synergy with artifacts already. So you already can play all the good artifact mid-range stuff, Urza Saga, the One Ring, etc. Or if you have high resource costs like Seeker Walk or a Natural Order deck, you can play generic good stuff to fill out your slots. Putting a combo into a control shell is all about buying time and accumulating resources. You're basically just trying to make sure your opponent can't interact with you and that they aren't winning themselves, and then you use your combo as a quick way to close out the game. This is best for combos that need a lot of time and do not mind drawing their combo pieces, and it can even be good for combos that would otherwise could be fast, but they just need because they need a lot of resources, and you don't mind them going slowly. So, for example, Breach is something that can go all in, but to go all in, you need to play things like Thought Scour or self-mill cards. You need ways to give yourself a lot of fuel very quickly. Or you can put Breach into a control shell because naturally over the course of the game, with you casting spells, you're going to give yourself the graveyard fuel that you need. A lot of combo decks that don't mind drawing their pieces can fit into a control shell. And it's sort of the last level that you can do, which is kind of not really a separate category. It's sort of an add-on that you can add to either of these three categories, is layering your combo or hybridizing your combo. So these are slightly different in that when you layer a combo, it's because you're taking a combo and pairing it with another combo that uses either the same pieces or very similar pieces. So this would be something like putting Time Vault into Paradox Academy because they both use artifact tutors, and if you find one part of one, you can kind of just layer on top of each other. They kind of all work together. They bring cohesiveness together. Or this is things like using a lands combo deck that also has Natural Order for Primeval Titan. When you get Primeval Titan, you get your land stuff. When you do your land stuff, it's already good. Like, they kind of work together. They're sort of working on the same axis and emphasizing through synergy. Hybridizing is pairing a combo with another deck that uses different resources so that you can dodge hate pieces and avoid interaction. This is using combos that don't really work together. So this is stuff like pairing Doomsday and Underworld Breach. They kind of overlap, but not really. And because they don't really overlap, it does bring this sort of dichotomy to the deck. It's sort of like the deck can draw one half of combo A and one half of combo B, and it doesn't work very well. But on the other hand, if your opponent prepares for combo A, then they'll lose to combo B. If they prepare for combo B, they'll lose to combo A. This whole idea of what shell do you put a combo in is really, really deep, and it's not something I can cover in the course of this video, but I wanted to introduce these concepts because these are things you can do with a combo deck. All right, let's get to case studies. So I'm going to look at 9 different combos that have seen play in Canadian Highlander, and I will be talking about the combos. I will not be covering the lists, but I will be sharing a spreadsheet, this spreadsheet here, which will have a bunch of lists that you can look through regarding these 9 different combos that I am talking about. I'm not going to say that these are the most up-to-date lists. Some of these are a little bit out of date, but how you tune and tweak a list is something that you can talk about infinitely and forever with people. If you want to talk about these, I recommend going to the Discord and talking with the pilots about them. People love talking about combo decks and, quibbling over this slot versus that slot. This is just meant to give you an idea of how you can take certain combos and fit them into various shells. The things I will be covering is I'm going to be covering what are the points that you need, what is the deck footprint and the combo pieces that you need to use, what resources are required to execute your combo, the card types and zones which help determine vulnerability and speed, and then ways that you can approach putting the combos into decks, including different speeds, because there are some combos that have sort of a default speed, but there are other ways of building combos that can sort of shift that dial. You don't have to build every combo deck according to its, quote unquote default or traditional way. All right, let's get started with Underworld Breach plus Brain Freeze plus LED/Lotus. So the combo of this deck is that you get an Underworld Breach out, you have Lion's Eye Diamond or Black Lotus, and you have something that mills yourself, with Brain Freeze being the best of the self-millers. And you have some amount of fuel to escape your Lotus or LED for mana, you Brain Freeze yourself until you've milled your deck, then you build up enough Storm to either mill out your opponent or you escape something like a Lightning Bolt to kill your opponent. The amount of points you need for your deck range from 3 all the way up to 10. This is because Breach itself is 3 points, Black Lotus is 7 points. You can play Lotusless, which is, just Breach, which is 3, but usually uses stuff like Demonic Tutor, which is 3 points. Or you can use things like Slushy, which uses Intuition and Gifts Ungiven, which are both 1 point. And the amount of combo pieces you need is kind of like 2 to 4. The reason for that is that what you need to execute this combo is you need Breach plus Freeze plus LED or Black Lotus. But you can also get away, depending on the amount of mana you have, with Breach plus a Tutor, which goes and finds LED or Black Lotus, which you then cast and make mana, and then you escape your Tutor to go and get Brain Freeze. You see how this goes. So the combo pieces are really, at minimum, you need 2, which is Breach plus a Tutor plus some amount of mana and fuel. Or you need to have, 4-ish cards, which could be things like, you basically need like 2 to 4 cards. Resources are 1 red plus Tutor cost plus fuel, which is usually at least 6 cards. If you wanted to get into the weeds, you can talk to dedicated Breach pilots and they'll tell you exactly what amount of fuel you need for everything, but you generally need some amount of fuel to start the whole Underworld Breach process. Or you need 2 white plus fuel plus 6 other cards based on mana, and this is, so the 1 red plus Tutor cost is going from Breach to Tutor to Black Lotus LED to Brain Freeze. The 2 white plus fuel is going from Savine's Reclamation to buyback Breach, buyback LED, Black Lotus to buyback Intuition, Gifts Ungiven to buyback Brain Freeze. The reason why it's 2 white is that if you cast Intuition or Gifts Ungiven, you'll usually have your pile as Savine's Reclamation, Black Lotus/LED, and Breach. You won't have Black Lotus plus Intuition, so it'd be LED plus Intuition plus Breach. And your opponent should give you Savine's Reclamation, because if they give you Lion's Eye Diamond, it requires less mana. The card types that you're going to use are going to be Enchantment, because you need to have your Underworld Breach on the field. They're going to be Artifact, sort of. They're going to be Artifact, which is Black Lotus LED, and they're going to be an instant or sorcery, usually instant for Brain Freeze. Obviously, if you lose your Breach, you lose your ability to do the combo, so that's really bad. Artifact, it's not so much that you have a vulnerability with artifacts in that you're weak to artifact removal, but you're weak to things which turn off artifact abilities. So things like Collector Oof do affect an Underworld Breach deck because you need to be able to sacrifice your Black Lotus or your Lion's Eye Diamond for mana. And then obviously, instant is, what Brain Freeze is. This means you're vulnerable. It puts you in the sort of non-creature permanent realm of combo, and means you're vulnerable to non-creature removal, but you solidly dodge all of the Swords to Plowshares, Lightning Bolts of the world. The zones that you're using are your graveyard and your battlefield. So, if your opponent Nile Spellbombs you or uses an Unlicensed Hearse to keep your graveyard clean, it's really hard to go off. And then obviously you need to keep Breach on the battlefield for this combo to work. Some shells that you can put this in are you can play a very fast deck that is all-in, which is what Breach Storm usually is, and that's using cards like Glimpse the Unthinkable and Tome Scour as additional millers and to help generate starting fuel. You can play an all-in deck that is hybridized, so this is something like Doomsday Breach, which is using Doomsday and Breach as 2 separate combos. Or you can do something that is sort of a medium speed deck that is control, and this is usually what Slushy is, which is just Jeskai control, or Jeskai plus another color control that revolves around Gifts Ungiven and Intuition to set up the Brain Freeze LED pile with Savine's Reclamation. They might also use something like Jace, the Perfected Mind, because it works as a self-miller, and also is just a decent way to stall aggro opponents. Another case study is Scapeshift plus either Valakut or Field of the Dead. The combo here is that you cast Scapeshift with 7 lands in play, and you either get Valakut plus 6 mountains, so Valakut deals 18 damage to your opponent, or you get Field of the Dead, so you make 7 zombies, which is 14 power, which usually is enough to win the game over the course of 1 or 2 turns. The amount of points that you need for this deck are 0. It's a 0-point combo deck, and the deck footprint is 2 to 3. Most Scapeshift decks that are on Valakut are also on Field of the Dead. You don't need to have Field of the Dead. You also don't need to have Valakut. You could just have one or the other. So the deck footprint is quite small. And you might say, well, what about all the other lands in your deck? Well, the other lands in your deck are just going to exist in your deck regardless. So they don't really count as part of your deck footprint because they're just going to be part of your deck anyway. The amount of combo pieces you need to find is just 1. You only need to find Scapeshift, and all you need is 2 green and 7 or more lands in play. The card types that you're going to be using are sorcery and land, which means that most of the time you're really only affected by counterspells. Lands are not very interacted with in Canadian Highlander. Basically only Wasteland and Strip Mine affect lands. I guess you can get cheeky and say Stifle on a fetch land, but lands are pretty hard to touch. And then the only zone you use is the battlefield, and this has like a big asterisk. Obviously you use the stack, everything uses the stack. This has a big asterisk because you use the battlefield in the sense that if someone destroys your lands, it's going to slow down your combo. But once you cast Scapeshift, you really don't care where your lands go. Once you cast Scapeshift and resolved it, the damage is already done. So in that sense, Scapeshift is actually very difficult to interact with outside of counter magic. Potential shells that you can put it in are slow control shells that are looking to basically hit their land drops mostly naturally, and they'll lean on tutors like Demonic Tutor and solve the equation to go find Scapeshift at the appropriate time. And they'll use things like Light from the Loam and Uro to accelerate a little bit, but mostly play like a grindy control game plan with a Scapeshift finish. Or you can play it in something like a medium sort of layered combo deck that uses lands combo pieces like Fastbond and Crucible of Worlds and Strip Mine in order to do lands combo stuff, but can also just accelerate into a Scapeshift kill, eventually. It's very flexible, but because it requires so many resources, and by resources I mean it requires so many lands in play, usually you see Scapeshift in slower shells, just because it's very hard to play cards that ramp you that aren't just actively bad. Okay. The next one I want to talk about is Time Vault plus Untapper. I can't shut up about this one. I've been talking about this all video. So Time Vault requires 7 points, and it really, it requires 7 points, but you can think of it as requiring maybe 8 if you squint at it, because the synergy between the keys and Mana Vault is really high, and also because you're playing an artifact deck, the temptation to run Tolarian Academy is really high, but really what you need is just 7 points for a Time Vault. The combination is just Time Vault plus anything that untaps Time Vault. Deck footprint, it's 2, because you only need a minimum of Time Vault plus a key. Obviously, you're probably going to run redundant copies, but you don't need more than that. And the only combo pieces you need are Time Vault plus the key. The resources you need for Time Vault are very, very small. You only need 4 mana, 2 for the Time Vault, 1 for the key, 1 for untapping. And obviously it can get a little bit higher depending on what you're doing. But, if you're casting Time Vault plus Teferi Slows the Sunset, it's 6 mana, 4 blue-white, which is still pretty reasonable. I mean, you don't have to play them all at the same time, and some of these things refund mana. The only card type you're really using is an artifact, which means that you are vulnerable to things like a Braid, Collector Oof, Canker Bloom, even things like Prismatic Ending or March for Otherworldly Light. But you dodge all the creature removal, or you can dodge most of the creature removal. The only zone you really use is the battlefield. You don't need to use the graveyard for Time Vault. Obviously, you can with things like Goblin Engineer, but you don't have to. And so it's pretty compact. Time Vault is an extremely compact combo, which is why it's worth 7 points. Some shells you can put it into are things like mid-range synergy shells, like Welder Vault, or sort of Esper sort of mid-range Vault that just play good Esper cards that happen to go find your Vault pieces and synergize with artifacts. So, you might see things like Oswald Fiddlebender or Transmute Artifact, because these are tutors that go and find your various pieces, but they also can go and find whatever you need for a fair mid-range game plan. If you're doing like the Welder Vault thing, you might see things like Emery or Goblin Engineer, because Goblin Engineer can entomb Time Vault pieces and get them back, and Emery can rebuy things out of the graveyard, as well as potentially mill your pieces as like a self-contained engine. Something you'll see in probably all Time Vault builds are things like Tesser the Seeker, because he automatically finds Vault and untaps it himself, and Urza Saga, because it's an extremely strong mid-range game plan that your opponent has to respect, because these decks have a lot of artifacts in them usually, as well as Urza Saga just tutoring half of the Time Vault combo. Sort of the last shell you can kind of put into is like a slow control shell, and this is usually when you would use things like Intuition in order to set up Time Vault plus Key plus Sabine's Reclamation. I put an asterisk next to this because these sort of slow control vault shells have sort of fallen out of favor because it's just more powerful to have like a mid-range artifact plan than it is to try and control everything and assemble it as part of one card combo. Time Vault is so easy to find, you don't need to play a control role. Okay, so that was Time Vault plus an untapper. Now let's talk about Painter Servant plus Grindstone. Now on the surface, Painter Servant and Grindstone and Time Vault and an untapper, they look really similar. It's one requires a 2-mana artifact and a 1-mana artifact, and the other requires a 2-mana artifact and a 1-mana artifact. The way Painter Servant Grindstone works is Painter Servant comes to play, makes everything some color. Grindstone mills your opponent, and mills 2 cards, and then it keeps repeating if both cards are the same color, because Painter Servant makes everything the same color. It mills your opponent's deck. Now Time Vault is a 7-point combo. Painter Servant is a big 0. And the reason for that mainly has to be, they both have a deck footprint of 2, combo pieces required are 2, is that Painter Servant plus Grindstone requires a higher upfront mana investment. You need 2 for the Servant, 1 for the Grindstone, and 3 to activate the Grindstone, so it's 6 generic at once, or you can do it in installments. So it's all generic, which is good. But the big deal is that there's a lot less redundancy, because there's only 1 Painter Servant and 1 Grindstone, and Painter Servant is a creature. When you're looking at the card types, creature is the most easily interacted with card type, so Painter Servant gives itself a lot more vulnerability compared to something like Time Vault, which is why it's 0 points and doesn't see as much play as something like Time Vault does. You still are basically only using the battlefielded zones. I guess technically this combo usually loses to things like Emrakul to shuffle Eldrazi, but most decks are going to die from it, so it's not that big of a deal. The potential shells you can put it in are sort of similar to Time Vault, in that you can put them in a sort of mid-range synergy shell like Welder, using Goblin Engineers and Emery, or you can put them into sort of a control shell with Painter Control. And the reason why this combo works better in a control shell than a Time Vault does is because you need to be able to protect your Painter Servant to be able to go off, which means you need a lot more resources, so you just need a lot of time. And it's not something that is necessarily great to power out quickly. Something you might see is backup combos in Painter Servant's decks. And you might see these in Time Vault decks as well, as things like Sword of the Meek-Thopter Foundry, as ways to just sort of lean into this mid-range synergy plan without having to commit all the way to your singular combo. Okay, now let's talk about Thassa's Oracle and an empty library. This is the the combo that is the bane of EDH, or at least was. The points that you need for a Thassa's Oracle deck are 7, because Thassa's Oracle is 7 points. And then generally most Thassa's Oracle decks are 8-point combo decks, because you tend to want Tainted Pact, because it is one of the only other ways to combo with Thassa's Oracle. It also happens to Tainted Pact also happens to be 2 CMC, which means they are both found by Transmute 2s, So it's usually a worthwhile include. The way this works is you cast Thassa's Oracle. It basically wins you the game if your library is less than or equal to your devotion to blue. So if you have no cards in your library, you win even if Thassa's Oracle gets removed. So you use Tainted Pact or Demonic Consultation to exile your library as an instant speed. You can use Thought Lash to exile your deck one at a time until your deck is 0. Or you can put it into Doomsday. And the way that this works is that rather than exiling your whole deck, is you make your deck 5 cards, and then you draw through your entire deck and play Thassa's Oracle with no cards in the library. The deck footprint of this is sort of 2 to 3 cards. You are generally going to want at least one redundant copy with Thassa's Oracle, so you're usually playing Demonic Constellation. You're usually not playing just Thassa's Oracle and Tainted Pact, so there's usually at least 3 cards. But the only combo pieces that you need are 2. You only need Thassa's Oracle plus Pact or Consult. And then the resources you need can vary dramatically. If you're doing Thoracle plus Pact or Consult, you need, blue, blue, black, an additional 1 if it's Pact, but only blue, blue, black if it's Consult. If you're doing a Gifts Ungiven pile, your Gifts Ungiven pile is Snapcaster Mage, Thassa's Oracle, Unearth / Reanimate, and Demonic Consultation. If your opponent gives you the most expensive pile, it's Snapcaster Mage plus Thassa's Oracle. So you have to cast Snapcaster Mage, cast Thassa's Oracle. So that's 1 blue, blue, blue. So, yeah, 1 blue, blue, blue. Oh, be 1 blue, blue, blue. 1 blue, 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 black, because then you have to cast Demonic Consultation with Snapcaster. So that's sort of the gifts pile. If you're doing Doomsday piles, you have to do triple black to cast Doomsday. And then there are a bunch of piles that cost either between 0 and 2 mana. If you want to know more about Doomsday, you can go look it up. Doomsday is very famous. There's a million piles out there. And then something like Thought Lash. Well, Thought Lash is 4 mana and Thassa's Oracle is 2, so it's 2 and quad blue. But you don't have to do it all right away. You can play Thought Lash first and then play Thassa's Oracle later and exile your library in response. The card types that you're using for these combos are creature, sort of. They're creature in that, you have to find a creature, which is not necessarily the easiest thing to do, because you have to find Thassa's Oracle. But you don't care if the Thassa's Oracle lives, so it's not really a creature using a creature. And then instant sorcery. So Thassa's Oracle combo mostly works on the stack, which means it's pretty resilient. It's not very vulnerable, but you do need to find a creature and some other card type, which is not the easiest thing to do. It's not the easiest thing to do quickly anyway. The zones that you end up using are the battlefield, and in some cases the graveyard. When you're doing things like gifts piles with Snapcaster Mage, you're using the graveyard, but generally speaking, you're only using the battlefield, and even then, you're only kind of asterisk using the battlefield because you don't really care if your Thassa's Oracle dies because you win even with an empty library. Potential shells you can put this in. You can put this into sort of a fast all-in shell, which is usually what Doomsday is. And the benefit of putting it into a Doomsday shell is that Doomsday only requires you to find 1 card, which is sorcery, as opposed to finding 2 different card types. And Doomsday decks will often use things like Lion's Eye Diamond and Gush in order to help build their Doomsday piles. You can put it into sort of a medium mid-range shell with Pyromancers, so you can just do things like Third Path Iconoclast, because it just naturally synergizes with casting a lot of spells, and you want to cast a lot of spells to find your Thassa's Oracle and Tainted Pact. And alternatively, you could have something like Lelia, who also happens to synergize with Tainted Pact. Lelia plus Tainted Pact makes a Lelia that's as big as your deck if you want to. Or you can put it into sort of a slow control deck, either pure Thoracle, or you can hybridize it. And I'll be honest that the hybridizing it is not very common, but some people have seen success hybridizing Thoracle into a lands control shell using Thought Lash, as opposed to the traditional Gifts Ungiven, Tainted Pact, Demonic Consultation, Thoracle thing. And normally, control shells will be looking at things like Muddle the Mixture or Gifts Ungiven, because these are Gifts Ungiven is a 1-card way at instant speed to assemble the combo. Muddle the Mixture is a serviceable counterspell. It's not amazing, but it's serviceable that can go and find both halves of the combo. Okay, let's talk about Reanimator. So Reanimator is technically a 2-card combo, but really it's kind of like 3. It's like 2.5-card, 3-card combo. You basically need a way to get your creature into the bin, so things like Entomb or Careful Study. plus some creature to reanimate, plus a reanimation spell. The deck footprint is 2 cards, because you technically only need, you technically only need a reanimation spell plus a way to reanimate, and then everything else can kind of just be part of your deck. Obviously, like a Fable the Mirror Breaker or Careful Study. Like, Careful Study is not the best card, but it's also a serviceable card in a lot of decks. But realistically speaking, you probably want some redundancy, so your deck footprint's probably around like 16 or so. You want a bunch of Reanimator targets, you want a bunch of ways to reanimate, and you want a bunch of ways to get your stuff into the graveyard. And again, like I said, there's really only 2 pieces to the combo, which is Reanimate plus Thing, but it's sort of like 3 pieces because you need Reanimate plus Thing plus way to get Thing into the graveyard. This is a 0-point combo deck, and the resources you need vary pretty wildly, but the minimum is just black. You need an Entomb plus a Reanimate, and I guess the life total of whatever you're reanimating. Card types that you're going to be using creatures, because that's what you're reanimating, is a creature. You're going to be using sorceries, enchantments, or instants in order to reanimate your threats. So this gives a little bit of interesting vulnerability. Obviously, because you're using creatures, because it's a reanimator deck, you are weak to creature removal. But most of the creature removal in Canadian Highlander does not hit the reanimator targets. Things like Lightning Bolt, Fatal Push, that sort of thing. Even Flame Slash. However, you're still vulnerable to the Heuristics and the Source of Plowshares and the Path to Exiles of the world. If you're using a sorcery or an instant, you obviously are only weak to counterspells, but some of the reanimation spells are enchantments, which means that you are weak to enchantment removal. If you animate dead your Archon of Cruelty and your opponent Prismatic Endings your animate dead, you look very sad. You become very sad. The zones you're using are the battlefield and obviously the graveyard. This is, you can't really do reanimation without the graveyard. Obviously, you can do some backup with things like Show and Tell or Oath of Druids, but most of the time you are going to be using your graveyard because that's where you have the most redundancy for this kind of effect. Some potential shows you can put it in. You can put it into sort of a fast all-in deck, which is what normal Dimir Reanimator is. This is using things like Jacefin's Prodigy or Frantic Search in order to loot cards away and put things in fast so that you can reanimate them faster. And fast is kind of with an asterisk because in a fast Reanimator deck, you want to reanimate your creature by turn 2 to 4, but it usually takes another 2 to 3 turns of swinging with your creature to win the game. So it's fast in the sense that it executes its combo quickly. It's not necessarily fast in the sense of winning right away. An exception is using something like Trenchgorger and Shallowgrave, because Trenchgorger can exile all the lands in your library to become like a 25 or 30 power creature, and then Shallowgrave gives it haste, and so it can just swing in and win right away. But most other situations, the all-in Reanimator deck is not fast in the same sense as a sort of a Breach deck would be fast. Another way you can play it is sort of a medium-speed control deck, which is what Esper Reanimator usually is. And this is playing more things that interact with the stack, more counterspells, playing sweepers like Balance and other removal, and then you get a few bonus things like Priest of Fellrights, which is a way to reanimate things without having to cast a spell. Like, you're not using the stack, you're just using an activated ability. And this tends to be a little bit slower. It's looking to try and get things done by turn 5, 6, as opposed to turn 2 to 4. Another way you can do it is you can full Reanimator into a mid-range shell. Reanimating a normal creature like a 4-drop or a 3-drop is still pretty good. It's just not necessarily as game-winning as reanimating an 8-drop. But using things like Recurring Nightmare and Survival of the Fittest lets you create loops and take creatures from your hand and put them in the graveyard and get sort of this long, grindy value game. And there's another way you can take Reanimator. Next, let's talk about Birthing Pod / Survival of the Fittest and Kiki-Jiki. So the way that this combo works is that you have a Birthing Pod and you pod away some creature to get another creature that untaps pod or flickers pod. And eventually you'll get to the point where you have Felidar Guardian, which untaps the pod into Kiki-Jiki, or you pod into Karmic Guide, which reanimates the Felidar Guardian, which blinks the pod. You pod away the Felidar Guardian into Kiki-Jiki Kiki-Jiki copies Karmic Guide, which brings back Felidar Guardian, which flickers Kiki-Jiki, and then you can make infinite Felidar Guardians with Kiki-Jiki. Another way that you can do this is with Survival of the Fittest. You can just discard cards so that you can get Kiki-Jiki and Felidar Guardian into your bin, and then you cast Karmic Guide, which brings back Felidar Guardian, which brings back Kiki, which flickers Karmic Guide, which brings back Kiki-Jiki. You do the whole thing again. So the points that you need for this list are either 0 if you're only doing the Birthing Pod line, because Pod went to 0, or 1 because Survival of the Fittest is 1. The deck footprint can be quite large because really what you need for the deck is your Birthing Pod and your Felidar Guardian and your Karmic Guide and your Kiki-Jiki, and that's like the minimum that you need in order for it to be a 1-card combo. But realistically speaking, you probably want a couple more untappers that untap pods so that you can pod from further down the chain. Instead of podding from a 3-drop into Felidar Guardian, you can pod from a 2-drop into a 3-drop untapper into Felidar Guardian, or a 1-drop into something like Corridor Monitor into a 3-drop untapper into Felidar Guardian. So the combo pieces that you need in asterisks are 1. This is because you just really need Birthing Pod or Survival of the Fittest. You do need fuel to start it, so if you're doing Survival of the Fittest, you need a creature card in your hand. If you're doing Birthing Pod, you need a creature in play. So it's 1 asterisk. The resources that you need a creature in play if you're doing Pod. Then you need 3 generic mana to cast Pod. And then you need, this calculation might be wrong, but you need to activate Pod so you go up the chain. So you need a bunch of Phyrexian green mana, which basically means you either need a bunch of extra green mana or you need a bunch of life. Yeah, this calculation might be wrong. I didn't double check it before I started recording. If you're doing survival, you need a creature in hand, and then you need 4 white, quadruple green. But even though that sounds daunting, you don't need it all at once because you just have Survival of the Fittest, which is 1 in a green, and you activate it 3 times to get your creature into the bin, get Kiki-Jiki into the bin, get Felidar Guardian into the bin, get Karmic Guide. So that's all the green activations, and then Karmic Guide obviously is 3 white to cast. So this is a lot of resources that you need in order to get Birthing Pod, Survival of the Fittest, plus Kiki-Jiki. You either need a lot of life, a lot of mana, or both, plus a creature into play. And you need your pod to stick around. So the card types that you use are creatures, artifacts, and an artifact for pod, and then an enchantment for Survival of the Fittest. Now, the enchantment is also an asterisk because once Survival of the Fittest has put your creatures into the right zones, you don't need it anymore. So it's not technically needed to stick on the battlefield, but you do definitely need creatures in order to make this combo work. The zones that you end up using are the graveyard and the battlefield. You need your creatures to stay in play. If they get removed from play, the whole thing bricks. You need your pod to stay in play. If the pod gets destroyed, your whole thing bricks. And then you need things, you're going to be using the graveyard because you're going to be reanimating Felidar Guardian. And some pod chains actually use Renegade Rallier, which also needs the graveyard. So it is vulnerable to graveyard hate and a lot of different types of removal, which makes it not necessarily very resilient. It's good against things like counterspells, but it's very bad against removal. So potential shells that you can put this into are some mid-range shells that just play the good stuff, plus pod with fast mana. Because really what you need is a bunch of mana and something in play. And your something in play can be anything that's good in the game. You can be playing things like Seasoned Dungeoneer, or Minsc & Boo, which can be powered out with fast mana. But you can also use some backup pieces with like Prime Speaker Vanifar or Eldritch Revolution as different ways of doing the pod chain that happen to just work with the good creatures that you put into your deck. Another way you can do this is by layering it with the Seeker Walk combo. So Spellseeker Time Walk combo is 9 points, which is a lot, but it happens to synergize quite well because you're already playing all these other creature tutors to go do the Kiki-Jiki combo, but at any time you could also pod a 2-drop into Spellseeker when with the Seeker Walk, and this is what the Kiki Walk deck tries to do. So because you're working with creatures innately, it's a lot easier and more natural to fold this into a mid-range shell than it is to try to play an all-in fast combo deck. The next one I want to talk about is Show and Tell plus Omniscience plus some payoff. The deck footprint is at least 3 cards because you need to have a way to get your way to cast spells for free into play, so your show and tell, or Eureka even, you need something that lets you cast spells for free, Omniscience, one with Multiverse, Stream Halls, or Darksteel Monolith. And then you need something that pays you off for being able to cast spells for free. And usually that means that it's some giant thing that is normally uncastable. This would be things like Emrakul the Aeon's Torn, because you cast it, you take an extra turn, you swing with it, 15 damage, Annihilator 6, it's pretty good. Or you cast something like Enter the Infinite to draw your deck and put one back, and once you have your deck in your hand, you can presumably win with anything, especially if you cast spells for free. Or you're casting things like Atraxa, other big card draw spells, card draw creatures or spells. The resources that you need to get this off the ground is 2 and a blue for your show and tell, but you also need to have your way to cast spells for free in your hand, plus your way to get payoffs either in your hand or some way to find that in your hand. So you need a lot of things in hand, but it's not a lot of mana to get off the ground. The card types that you're usually going to end up using, you're going to use a sorcery for show and tell, and then you're usually going to use an enchantment in order to be able to cast spells for free. The other cards that you have here, like Emrakul or Atraxa, they matter in that they're your payoff, and so if they get removed, it's sort of annoying. But as long as you can keep casting spells for free, you usually can find a way to win the game. So really, your major point of vulnerability, your major card tip that you're using is your enchantment or artifact that you're putting into play off of show and tell, which also can conveniently just put these, not Enter the Infinite because it's a sorcery, but can just put Atraxa or Emrakul into play if you need to. The zones that you're using are just battlefield. You don't usually need to use the graveyard or anything for this kind of combo deck. And the potential shells you can put this into are all-in fast shells that are layered with lots of ways to cheat out things. So things like Channel, Tinker, Omnitell. This is Exelia's 5-color Walker Omnitell list, which basically uses Tinker to go get Darksteel Monolith or Chromatic Orrery, which gives you a lot of mana to just hardcast things. Channel, which lets you pay life for mana, for generic mana, which lets you just, again, hardcast things. Or you can fit it into sort of a medium-slow control deck, because all you need to do is have time to assemble the pieces in your hand. And a control shell might use things like Dig Through Time or Mystic Confluence, because these are perfectly serviceable cards on their own, but when you have an Omniscience in play, these act as giant draw spells in order to give you more looks at payoffs. Both shells probably will use something like Solve the Equation to go find Show and Tell Eureka, and they might use stuff like the One Ring to go and draw you lots of pieces. So, yeah, this is not as popular in Canadian Highlander as it is in something like Legacy, just because there's not a lot of density of show and tells, so you have to find a lot of pieces, so it's harder to pull off with the same consistency. Okay, and I believe this is the final one. Let me check. Yep, this is the final combo I want to talk about, which is the Natural Order combo. So the way the Natural Order works is you have some green creature, either like Land War Elves or a Grist Insect token. You cast Natural Order, you get some big green idiot. Things like Atraxa, which is a giant lifelinker that draws you a bunch of cards. Primeval Titan, which goes and gets you a bunch of lands. Or things like Craterhoof Behemoth, which, if you have a lot of creatures in play, can just straight up one-shot your opponent. The points you need are 2, because Natural Order is 2 points, and the deck footprint is technically 2, because you can fit this into shells that just have Natural Order and the Natural Order target, and then everything else is just sort of cards you would play anyway. But you could also say that the deck footprint is kind of like 20 plus cards, because you need a density of green creatures in order to make Natural Order castable. The only combo pieces you need to find, there's only 2 combo pieces. It's Natural Order plus a green creature in play, so it's a 2-part combo. And the resources you need is a green creature in play plus 2 green. The card types you're going to be using are creatures and sorceries. It's really bad if Natural Order gets countered, because you've already sacrificed something as part of its cost. But if an opponent can keep your board clear, then Natural Order is basically a dead card. So, yeah, it's definitely... And all the payoffs for Natural Order are obviously creatures, which can get removed by creature removal. Basically, the only zone that's used is the battlefield. You're just looking to keep a creature in play, Natural Order into it, and then have another creature in play. So You're not using the graveyard at all. You get to avoid that vulnerability. Some potential shells you can put this in. You can put this into sort of a medium speed mid-range shell. This is something like Attract Syntaxes, which are just playing good hate bears and also good green cards like Endurance and Sentinel of the Nameless City. These are cards you'd probably play anyway. And with that plus mana dorks, you generally hit the right density for being able to natural order into something like Atraxa. Or you can look at it in something that's like a layered combo deck, like Rexer or lands. Because if you're in lands, then natural ordering for Primeval Titan gets you various land cards, which are part of lands combos. And if you're in Rexer, well, natural order is a way to get to things like Atraxa, but you can also put them into the graveyard with Survival of the Fittest and reanimate them, which is another way of sort of taking the synergy between natural order and reanimation to cheat big things into play. And then finally, like kind of the last way you can put it into is sort of like a fast to medium speed layered ramp deck, which is what Cradlehoof is usually considered in this format. It's called Cradlehoof because of Gaia's Cradle and Craterhoof Behemoth. And you play all the elves, and you play even like the super mana accelerants like Priest of Titania or Raphelos in order to make lots of mana to natural order into Craterhoof Behemoth, or even hardcast the darn thing. Cradlehoof has definitely fallen out of favor in recent times because it's very vulnerable. You need to have a lot of very bad creatures in play in order to do the thing, and you have the classic problem of ramping into nothing. But this is another way you can take the whole natural order. Okay, so that's really all I wanted to talk about. Thank you for watching the video. If you have questions or comments, feel free to put them in the comment section below or tag me on the Discord. I'm going to put all the resources that I've used into the video description, so feel free to look at them there. And for long-form theory content, check out the playlist on the left, and for some gameplay videos, see the playlist on the right. I hope this was helpful. Thank you for watching, and have a great day.